T-minus 10 seconds.
You're listening to News and Movies Radio. newsandmoviesradio.com. Where the world comes to listen.
And now, before the next show starts, let's enjoy an intermission. You'll find our snack bar chock full of good things to eat and drink. Tasty, tempting hot dogs, thirst-quenching soft drinks, fresh, crunchy popcorn, a complete assortment of delicious candy, and a full line of cigarettes. You've plenty of time, so visit the snack bar now. A tasty treat will double your enjoyment of the show. For your convenience, we shall keep you informed of the remaining intermission time, 3 minutes before the next show starts.
Welcome to News and Movies Radio, broadcasted live around the world. I am your host, Andrew K. Rawls. Today we'll be talking with longtime movie memorabilia collector and dealer Alan J. Adler on his early days in the hobby and how he got started collecting movie posters and lobby cards. Stay tuned. You're listening to News and Movies Radio, newsandmoviesradio.com.
For the absolute finest in vintage movie memorabilia, look no further than BuyMoviePostersInc.com. Buy Movie Posters Inc. features an incredible selection of hand-picked original movie posters, lobby cards, and stills from all over the world, with titles from the classic era of Hollywood to the present. Browse our online gallery and email us your want lists as we scour the globe for more hidden treasures. Also, Buy Movie Posters Inc. is always looking to buy quality movie memorabilia. If you have movie material that you'd like to sell outright or consign, email us at buymovieposters@gmail.com. You won't be disappointed.
Welcome back. My guest on the show today is noted author, movie memorabilia collector, and dealer Alan J. Adler. In 1977, Alan published one of the first full-color movie poster books titled Science Fiction Horror Movie Posters in Full Color. The book featured 44 full-color movie posters with a detailed synopsis of the plots and individual poster analysis, all expertly researched decades before the arrival of the internet. In the early 90s, after establishing himself for nearly 4 decades as one of the leading authorities on movie poster art, he helped found Archives at 20th Century Fox, a division dedicated to preserving and saving memorabilia and props from studio productions. Today he continues to write novels and buy and sell original movie memorabilia through his website and eBay store, the Museum of Mom and Pop Culture. Alan, welcome to News and Movies Radio.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So even on the East Coast, we've been hearing a lot about the California wildfires. Are you all staying safe out there?
Well, safe is a relative word anywhere these days, but it seems like the fires are getting worse. I've lived in the mountains up above Malibu for about 30-something years, ever since I came to California. And it seems like after every fire not getting burned, I'll take a bunch of more stuff and put it in storage. But this time we had to evacuate for a week as opposed to just a day or two, and it's a little bit different. The fires are moving faster. I mean, you guys in North Carolina have had different kinds of weather with the storms. I mean, I grew up with hurricanes too, and Hurricane Hazel and all that when I was a little kid, and it just seems like the weather and the planet is acting up, and it's not the best friend for perishable items.
It does seem, though, that this year the fires aren't isolated in California. It pretty much seems to be statewide, but I did read that they do have it pretty much contained. I think except for 2 or 3 are still burning. Yeah, it makes, if you have a conversion van or one of those Chevrolet like 1500s, it's got a big bed in the back. Living in California, that almost, the last couple of years with all the fires, that might actually make sense because you just throw your stuff into the back of it and drive off.
The better thing is to have a horse and some saddlebags because it's not so easy to get out depending on when you try to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Much more of a survivalist attitude having lived through that kind of stuff and seeing it get worse. There's no telling what it's going to be like 20 years from now.
So on a lighter note, you mentioned I believe to me, well, you're born in Asheboro, North Carolina, but wasn't there a time when you grew up on Queens Road in Charlotte, which is where I'm at?
Yeah, when we moved to Charlotte, we lived a couple of places, and by the time I was 12 or 13, we landed at Queens Towers.
Okay, so you were
great spot.
You were born in Asheboro and then moved to Charlotte at 12 years old. Let me ask you this: can you describe at that age the scene back then in the Charlotte area for movie theaters and drive-ins?
Well, I knew like the Visualite Theater. I would go around. Well, from the time I was a little kid, I would go and introduce myself to theater managers and get to know them and talk to them and go sit in their office with them and pull stuff out of the trash while I was sitting there talking to them. And I would sit on a ticket girl's lap, when I was real little. There was a store right down the street from my parents had a store right down the street from one of the theaters in Asheboro. So all very simple. There weren't a lot of collectors of anything. There weren't even any comic book stores, as I remember back then. Collecting was all this weird guy that lived in a funeral home, and he was a projectionist in 1939, and he had bags of stills from 1939, or an Episcopal priest that I ran into that loved certain stars like Ingrid Bergman and had an Ingrid Bergman collection. Wasn't a lot of organization in that period of collectors. I wrote letters when I was 9 or 10 to anybody I could looking for, Dracula and Frankenstein. Yeah. They would have been $10.
We'll get to that in a second. Let me ask you this. So when you were in Charlotte at 11 or 12 years old, was the Visualite Theater kind of your go-to place?
Well, the Visualite was a really nice, the guy that owned the Visualite was a really nice guy. His name was Robert Schrader. He was a Jewish guy, so that was a nice connection. I was a Jewish kid, and Jewish kids in the South were, kind of rare. Anyway, there was a certain connection there. And he had the kind of arty films, not the adult films, but I guess Bardot would play there and so on. But the theaters that got the monster movies was one downtown, kind of an old rundown place, and they would get double features, or they would play double features. But most of the AIP double features and that kind of stuff that I really cut my teeth on, that I loved, I saw in Asheboro before I left, before 1960.
So in Asheboro, the theater you grew up going to as a kid, that was
the Carolina.
That was the Carolina.
Sunset, and I dedicated my book to those two theaters and the managers of those two theaters.
Were you able, and this was actually before you moved to Charlotte, so you were very young, were you able to make any discoveries at those two theaters before moving to Charlotte?
Oh, my God. I mean, I used to take a cab from elementary school to the theater and go see whatever the new movie was, especially if it was a horror science fiction film. I would go to the trash cans afterwards, and I found stuff, and I knew the theater managers. I'd introduced myself to them. They would hold things for me. I would grill them for what they were going to get. I would even talk to them about stuff, and so I at 9 or 10. And I have to credit my father for kind of guiding my technique and so on, firm handshake, look adults in the eye and ask them what you want kind of technology. I amassed quite a collection. I mean, it was all trash. I mean, nobody wanted it. Nobody cared about it. They couldn't believe that anybody cared about any of this.
Alan, titles such as...
I Was a Teenage Werewolf. That was the first movie that I talked to the manager and got the insert for, and that was 1957. So I started collecting 1950s science fiction movie posters in the 1950s.
So you've literally been in this hobby for 60 years.
That's true, a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And that, evolved over the years. I mean, making my own films, to working in ad agencies, sort of seeing posters from my own movies. that was quite an amazing thing too, to collect posters all your life. Then you make a movie and you get the one sheet from the movie that you just made. I mean, that, talk about full circle stuff.
When you were in Asheboro, by the time you moved from Asheboro to Charlotte, in terms of posters, I mean, science fiction horror posters, had you already amassed a treasure trove by the time you were?
I left a ton of stuff behind as a kid. I left a ton of toys behind, but I started again when I got to Charlotte. Now, like that theater I was telling you that was in downtown Charlotte, I can't remember the name of it. It's long gone, I'm sure, but it was in walking distance of Film Row, which is, so I would go there, and I'd take the bus, go to the movies, and I'd start sniffing around the trash cans on Film Row. Well, I can't describe to you the thrill of looking in a trash can and finding a stack of mint lobby cards from This Island Earth, which I'm remembering. They, in bins, they used to throw the stuff away. Now, it was still not worth anything, only to me. There was no dollar value on any of this stuff. It was just religious iconography to me. I love those movies, and that ink ran in my veins, and wherever there were posters, I went to it. Or I'd call my father up and I'd say I found a pile of stuff. He'd get off work. He'd come. Well, he had a store in town, so it wasn't like he got off anything, but he would come, pick me up. I'd load the car up and haul all the stuff back home. I'd sort it through it, and I kept it all for
in Charlotte,
years.
Right?
Put it up. That was when I lived in Charlotte.
Yeah,
correct.
In Charlotte too. So let me ask you this: in Charlotte, the Manor Twin Theater, which opened in 1947, I don't know if you remember that one or not.
Oh, the Manor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I used to walk to the Manor Theater.
It's across from the Duke Mansion.
They played big. They played the big movies. They played big movies.
It's still alive and well. It's still quite nice. Now, you said big movies. Now they only show kind of the art house independent films.
Well, for a while I lived on the second floor of an antique shop that was about 10 doors away from the Manor Theater.
Do you remember finding any posters there? Were there any discoveries you made at the Manor Theater?
Not really. There were places that didn't have a diaphanous flow for whatever reason. There were places there were managers that you knew you could get something from, and managers that didn't have anything to do with you. It's like that in life, I guess, everywhere. So there were certain theaters that had a flow of material to a young troublemaker or like me, and then others, they didn't mess with them, they'd care less. They just always send it. The big line was, it cost money, we send it back. Because it was only a few cents, so but it did cost them something, but that really wasn't that wasn't real.
And then uptown off of West Trade Street, beside the old Wachovia building, there was the Charlotte Theater. That was the
one, I think, that had the lowest budget of the science fiction stuff.
Okay, and that was opened, I think, early 20th century, like 1913, and survived.
Yeah, it was an old theater.
But then they showed, I think, towards the later years in the 1960s when they started going to exclusively adult programming. But that was the one you said that you found the mint lobby card set for This Island Earth, right? Was that the one you made some dumpster dives at the Charlotte Theater uptown?
So after theater, I walked to Film Row, and that was a few blocks away, and that's where the bins of posters were. And it was more than a lobby card set. It was handfuls of the stuff. I mean, it was just, and other, I later went back to that same place when they closed it up, and the guy that was in charge of all that said, okay, I've been told to throw this away. I'm giving it to you, and you throw it away or whatever you want to do with it. And I went through the whole place, and my buddy Robbie McClure, who his father was one of the first film producers in North Carolina. That's another whole offshoot how I got into film production. But Robbie and I collected posters. He had drive-ins. Robbie's father did, McClure did. They did the film Preacher Man, and also produced that Dr. Gore film. It was called The Body Shop. When I worked on it, that was the first movie I'd ever worked on.
But Alan, the Charlotte Theater, was that Film Row? Was that where you found the collection outside the bins, the Charlotte Theater? You mentioned Film Row.
I worked back from the trash cans to where all the stuff was they were throwing it away from, and there was a bigger bin there, and there was it was a second story of this little brick office building, and there were posters in cubby holes all the way back to the 1940s. I mean, I remember 4 or 6 mint one sheets from Invasion of the Saucermen out. I mean, and 2 or 3 or 4 mint lobby sets. I mean, it's just stuff had been sitting there forever. Of course, it was in the 70s then when I got hold of this. I was a little bit older.
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a second. But let me ask you this. So we're still on the Charlotte Theater. Was that the finds you talked about making on Film Row? That was the Charlotte Theater, right?
No, they were not. They were not. I never got a single piece of paper from the Charlotte Theater.
Okay, so what theater were we talking about? This was called Film Row?
And I would walk from there to Film Row, and there were trash cans. It was closed because it was a Saturday. It was Saturday morning. I would go on the bus, and I would sometimes find some of the stuff in the trash cans. I'd have to call my father, and he'd come pick me up in his Cadillac, and we'd fill the trunk of the Cadillac with posters and bring them back home.
Oh, so how old were you this? Were you 12 or 13 years old?
Yeah, okay. 13, something like that, before I could drive.
Yeah, there were some pretty cool theaters in Charlotte. I was doing some research, some drive-ins that even survived up until the early 80s. And then, they even survived that whole multiplex thing that went on in the late 80s where, movie theaters were being built in shopping malls. So that Film Row discovery you made, I mean, was that one of the bigger ones looking back?
Yeah, that was one.
And then you mentioned in Asheboro, though, that your first poster you ever got from a theater manager was I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Did you actually see the film when it came out? And what kind of inspired you? You were so young.
Yeah, I saw the movie and I totally flipped over the daggone thing, and I stood there and practically stared a hole through the poster on the wall, and I begged the theater manager to let me have it. And when the movie was over, he let me have it.
Mm-hmm. And so you were how old? You said around 5 or 6?
Well, I was born in 1948, so in 1957 I was 9 years old. So that dates it for me, so I don't have to try to think about it. I was 9 years old when I fell in love with monster movies and posters. I mean, I was in love with them before that, but I kind of went pro at 9. That's the way I look at it.
You think about the 1950s, your teen years when you began collecting. One could argue in terms of film, the 1950s are some of perhaps the best decade in cinematic history. You've got North by Northwest from Hitchcock, Vertigo, The Rear Window, Row. She was in a ton of films in the 50s. And then you mentioned B science fiction films that would only be appreciated later, like Invasion of the Saucermen, but there was big ones too. Day of the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And then you mentioned...
I think it was the war. If you're looking at a decade, I think and you can add noir to it as well. I'm a big fan of noir.
Mm-hmm.
It is that, that post-war can do, we won the war, we are making these movies, we can do anything. It just there was a tremendous exuberance at the time, and a lot of dark feelings from the war, too. A lot of dark, misogynist feelings mixed in, and guys that had been, taken away from home for 4 or 5 years and had people shooting at them. I mean, you don't come back home and just kind of laugh it off. So there were dark underpinnings in a lot of the films you mentioned, and it permeated the 1950s. It was an undercurrent. I'm not quite sure why I tapped it. I think I was a lonely kid and there wasn't anything to do. And it was a black and white world. So I went to the movies almost every day as often as I could. So I put everything I had into it and just studied the films as they came out, loved them, and that was my education.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, too, you would develop relationships with some of these theater managers. You mentioned the one that was Jewish, but looking back, other than, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, what were some of the other posters you got in Asheboro, particularly the years in Asheboro, just by asking?
Oh, God. Well, another memorable piece was the poster from Astounding She-Monster. I remember I got that. And that's a pretty lascivious poster even now. It's really one of my favorite kind of pin-up type posters. And it was very sexy. And you can imagine at the time. And so anyway, I took it to school at Show and Tell, and it created quite a stir. And actually started a number of people collecting movie posters for a short amount of time. And I had to kind of fight off these other people, I kind of let the genie out of the bottle, and when I would show that kind of stuff. So that was one, and I remember fondly getting old motion picture heralds and taking the really colorful, beautiful ads out of them. They had, terrific one-page color ads for a lot of the science fiction films. And, I remember Creature from the Black Lagoon and so on. I'm pretty sure there was a color ad for that. So it was like, it wasn't just posters, it was clippings out of the newspaper. It was, there just wasn't the barrage of media and all the different things you could choose from. You just, if you found a MGM letterhead or a letter from MGM, to some theater manager telling them about something, you took that out of the trash because that was, you took whatever you could get, you took it all, and you sorted it out later.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that your parents are pretty supportive of your collecting habits, as well as going so far as to drive you from theaters around town so you could ask for posters.
My father was very supportive. My father loved movies, and he got it. He said, this stuff is great. He said, I'll support you doing this. And it's like, I remember being woken up after I'd gone to bed, I was a little kid, so I would go to bed at 7 o'clock or whatever. I remember my father waking me up like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, one night, or maybe he did this more than once, and said, the new window cards are on the telephone poles. Let's go. And I got dressed, and I think he had a Buick at the time, and so we would ride down the road, and in those days they took window cards and they would put a nail through them and hang them to a telephone pole. So there would be all these window cards from some great science fiction movie, whatever, that was going to open up. And so my father would ride from one telephone pole to the next. I'd jump out of the passenger seat, run up, carefully remove the poster from the telephone pole and go put it in the car. So I would, I don't know, maybe I'd get 10 of them or whatever, and I probably sold one or two for 25 cents each at school and kept the rest. But it was, it was the acquisition, it was the finding of them, and the excitement of it, was beyond even what the particular material was. Although, if I was pulling something from Creature from the Black Lagoon off the telephone pole, I was a whole lot more excited than if I was pulling some other piece of crap off the pole. But
you mentioned, though, when you moved from Asheboro to Charlotte, there was a significant portion of your collection that you had to leave behind.
Well, there were a lot of things I had to leave behind. I'm a big toy soldier collector as well, and
was there any particular reason for that, or just didn't make the trip, or?
Well, you just didn't get to take everything sometimes when you moved from town to town. I mean, like I say, this was not valuable stuff. These are just box of kids' toys, but I remember the stuff I had to leave behind. I mean, my father was I have to continue to credit him and my mother, but my father, he was in a buying trip for their store. They had ladies ready to wear and lingerie shops, stuff like that. When I was a little kid, like 10 years old or 8 years old, even younger, really. I guess I'm talking about before I was 9. The stuff I collected before that were toys. He would call me from FEA Schwartz in New York and stand there in the aisle, the biggest toy place in the world, and say, okay, there's this, what do you got, what do you want? And he would buy it for me, bring it home. I mean, I had all these incredible British toy soldier sets, that would be worth a fortune. Well, not a fortune today, but I wish I had them because I've had to go back and try to find some of them as a toy collector. I've done cross-country trips with $10,000 worth of posters in the back of the car, traveled for 3 weeks, traveled just on blue highways and stopped at every junk store, and traded movie posters for toys. That's when I was beginning to study toys and studying the people that sculpted the toys and, the power of them and so on. I built this huge toy collection. I was playing with toys for hours a day. I asked my wife, I said, look, am I crazy? And I was photographing, and my wife said, no, you're crazy, but keep going. And posters lead to toys lead to, business, to, it's like, I guess the unique thing about my story is that I want to tell anybody that wants to listen is that it was all connected from this one little thread that started when I was a little kid that I pulled on. It was all woven into one piece of material, one string from the beginning. So that's that.
Let me ask you this. We'll get to that a little bit deeper on the cross-country trips here in a bit. But so after you had started amassing a collection in your teenage years in Charlotte, you found some pretty decent material out of Ben's. You mentioned the This Island Earth lobby card set, some Invasion of the Saucermen posters here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. You then went off to college at UNC Chapel Hill, which is where I went. And I know we had just talked in the Carolina Theater. There were a lot of Carolina theaters in the North Carolina area back in the day. So the Carolina Theater in Asheboro is the one you acknowledged in your book, which you grew up going to as a kid. But then there's the historic Carolina Theater in downtown Durham as well. And then there was another Carolina Theater right down from the Ackland Art Museum on Franklin Street that was open for a number of years and finally closed.
I didn't collect movie posters back then. Back then, I went to the movies.
Okay.
It was like it had evolved. The posters were fine. I didn't find anything in those days. And I collected comics at that time. But I didn't actively collect posters. Nobody was giving posters away. They didn't give them away at any of those theaters you mentioned. So, and I was involved with going to school and so on. So I didn't really collect posters at that particular
your college years. You didn't collect posters too much at all.
I collected comics, and I was studying the movies because that's what I studied in college.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did go.
And writing. There
was obviously the big one is the Varsity on Franklin Street, which I
went there a million times.
And I saw plenty of second-run films there as well. I actually scouted the Varsity back in 2010. It was actually going through new ownership and new management. And the guy that owns the Chelsea Theater actually went out and bought the Varsity as well. When I went through upstairs, and there were some pretty decent 80s titles in there, but for the most part, it was just rolled modern stuff. But I bet back in the day,
I like rolled posters.
Yeah, neither do I. But I bet back in the day though, there was some pretty amazing stuff there.
Oh, sure, there was pretty amazing stuff everywhere. But I guess I got to say, what I got out of the Varsity Theater was that movies could be an art form. It was a different kind of movie that I started going to see. Bicycle Thief and that kind of stuff. It's like, and I found escape, and I found monsters and drama in the movies when I was a little kid at the theaters in Asheboro. But the theater, when I was going to college, I mean, there was like Bonnie and Clyde or Andy Warhol films. There were all kinds, there was color, and, it was like, wow, there's a whole different world out there, and the movies themselves can be art. It was a big realization for me, and when I wanted to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I had no idea. I said to myself, what do I like to do more than anything else? It was go to the movies, so I went and got a film degree, and at that time, it was one of the first times they offered a film degree. It was through the journalism department at Chapel Hill.
So you mentioned you didn't buy posters, obviously, or go out looking for posters during your college years, but
I never bought posters in my. I count posters I bought on two hands in 60 years of collecting.
Did you sell any while you were in college? I mean, you had to have a lot of stuff you had left back at home.
No, didn't sell in those college either. It was not an active. Posters were the posters themselves were a dormant element of my active life. For instance, I found I got my hands on some comic books, and I hadn't read comic books since Daffy Duck when I was a little kid. So I pick up this Thor comic. I'm sitting and I read it through, and this Jack Kirby stuff. I mean, you turn a page and there's a double played splash of these rocket ships coming at you, and then you get to the end of it and it says to be continued. Well, I completely flipped out over comics. You mentioned that you're interested in comics too. My pursuit was sequential imagery and the artistry and the power of those comics at the time. So I studied and acquired comics, but once again, acquiring comics at that period, there were no comic book stores. I would run ads in the local newspaper at Chapel Hill and meet guys in parking lots at church and get 2 shopping bags full of old Marvels for $5. I mean, that's how I got my Spider-Man #1. I had a couple of Spider-Man #1s and a Amazing Fantasy 15, where I got them for pennies. It's like, again, it was like being ahead of that wave, not knowing that there was even a wave there. I just followed my passion.
So when you went off to college in North Carolina, the posters that you had amassed, I imagine you probably had hundreds, if not thousands. Did you leave all those behind at home while you went off to school?
They were packed up in deep storage. I packed them.
Mm-hmm.
I packed them and put them away.
Mm-hmm. And
I didn't start selling as a dealer until the early 70s when I got out of school, was married, needed to make a little extra money. The post, like a half sheet from Beasts from 20,000 Fathoms was worth maybe $10, and I was probably asking $25 for it. Forbidden Planet was probably $35, but I wouldn't even sell them for what that was worth. But it's like I watched. I mean, when I pulled stuff out of the places, I had like 20 mint inserts from Psycho. I mean, I remember selling those things for $10 a piece, and then selling
Where'd you
for
find those
$20 in the place that I worked back to from finding this stuff when I went to the Charlotte Theater. I mean, I went back. It's like a gold mine. It's like Treasure Sierra Madre when they said thanks mountain. I would say that. I'd say thanks mountain, because if I've been anything in my life, I've been a finder of things. And listen to this. You'll probably want to talk about this later too, but I did that for 20th Century Fox. That's how I turned 3 weeks into 10 years. I built a museum for them with over $6 million worth of stuff that I found in the trash. They loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the major finds, like the Psycho insert find you just mentioned, was that after?
No,
that before?
That was part of a much bigger find where there were a dozen Forbidden Planets and a dozen everything.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So was that before you went off to college as well, or after you graduated, did you resume?
I was after college. Robbie McClure and I. See, Robbie's father, so fate plays a big part in luck, okay? the one that my first marriage, the lady that I married, her family was Catholic, but there were like 6 girls and 1 brother, and so I was in love and dated the oldest daughter, and the second daughter, also this beautiful young girl. Her boyfriend was named Robbie McClure, so I met Robbie McClure. So Robbie McClure, father, ended up being the first movie producer of any note to do films in the North Carolina area, did the Preacher Man film. And he had an office on Film Row. And his partner was Robert Schrader. It's like, holy mackerel, you know, all of this stuff coming together. That's how I got to work on the first movies made in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So Film Row.
I wrote Earl Owen's first movie, if you know who that guy is.
Yeah. So Film Row. What part of town was that in? Was that over?
Well, it was. You know, I don't even know what part of town you call it now, but it was the low end part of downtown. So I guess it was. I guess it was North Charlotte, the northern end of downtown. There were churches down there. There were, you know, kind of rundown office buildings.
Mm-hmm. So when you got out of college, you resumed poster collecting.
I went back to Charlotte.
You went back to Charlotte.
And I went to work as a film editor.
With Robbie?
No, Robbie was younger than me. He was doing his own thing. I think he was in college then, but I went to work as a film editor for Jefferson Productions, which was the biggest film production house in the South. And I worked for them for 2 years. That was my first job out of school. But the first movie I ever worked on was a movie that Robbie's father produced called The Body Shop, which Pat Patterson produced and directed. And I, you know, started up sweeping the floor, and about an hour of sweeping the floor, I found this box of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which I read when I was a kid. And I said, oh, I know. He said, you know these magazines? I said, yeah, sure. And so, like, within an hour, I was the assistant to this guy. He said, you're my assistant now, which didn't really mean anything. I still had to sweep the floor, but I worked my way up to be at this guy's shoulder, and it was pretty darn amazing. And this guy made his own posters. He had a printing shop. Then he printed his own posters, and before he passed away, he gave me a bunch of his posters that he had printed. He did live magic shows on stage, you know, horror shows, those traveling horror shows, and it would do live magic shows on top of drive-in theater booths, and which he would put window cards up around town on the telephone poles and stuff, and say, win a free baby, you know, or win a dead body. And he'd have these contests, and if it was the free baby, he would give them a baby chick. And if it was a dead body, it would be a chicken from the grocery store still in the plastic. And it was a big joke and everything, but I've still got the posters that he printed. I've got a win a dead body and win a free baby window card, which are probably some of the last posters I'll sell. I've been selling just about everything else, and I've sold a lot.
When you came home though from college, or you came back to Charlotte, at what point was the discovery made of the Psycho inserts? And I think you said what other titles? There was a big find you said you made.
Story. Oh, you name it. It was everything. Well, so Robbie's dad had, you know, an office on Film Row because he owned drive-in theaters. It's another story. But so Robbie found out that the place that, you know, that we'd gotten stuff from before was shutting down. So Robbie actually got in there before I did. And he called me up, and Robbie was laughing, and, you know, he said, I just cleaned this place out. There's nothing left. You know, he was just laughing like crazy. Still, this stuff was not worth anything. We just did it because we loved it. He liked Western stuff. and he only liked monster movies really because I turned them on to him, I think. But his dad liked westerns, and he liked western stuff. But he liked Marilyn Monroe and would go for all that, you know. But at any rate, I said, Robbie, just tell me, you know, just tell me where to go. I'll find something. And he said, okay, try, you know. So I went there, talked to the guy, and
so this is a movie theater. He told you this was a movie theater, right?
This was a movie poster warehouse.
Okay, well, a movie poster warehouse, like a poster exchange or a poster warehouse.
It was a poster exchange.
Okay,
not National Screen. It was some, you know, chain in the South.
Okay,
probably
here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, right?
Yeah, Carolina area. It's on Film Row. This place is on Film Row, right down the street from the Charlotte Theater. Everything was real close.
Okay.
So, here's the story. I go up to the second floor of this, and the door of this place is wide open, right? The door wasn't closed because it's just old paper trash. Well, you know, I'm looking, I find, you know, this and that. Sure enough, though, Robbie, you know, I mean, he got a bunch of stuff, but I still found, like, you know, a stack of one sheets and stills and lobby cards from Invasion, the Body Snatchers. You know, it was, that level of stuff was, there was still some of that floating. He probably grabbed a few, but didn't even see them all, you know. So I got, you know, enough to make myself happy, but, you know, so as I'm leaving, as I'm, like, looking towards the open door to go back out again, I said, wait a minute. So I go up to the door, and I close the door. And behind that door was another door. And Robbie's exuberance, you know, I love Robbie. I mean, I would never have found anything if it wasn't. But in Robbie's exuberance, he must have just pushed that door open and never closed it. So I open this door, and what's in this room? But all the inserts and the half sheets, everything, you know, the version War of the Worlds, you know, multiples of the A version. I mean, you know, it was just, and a lot of stuff was mint, you know, like, it had never been sent out. Once in a while there was something that might have been folded or had some staple holes in it, but, I mean, not staple holes, but pen holes in it, but everything was mint, and it was stored flat from the beginning, never, you know, just stacked, standing up, the weight of it, holding one title up next to the other. It was, you know, it's Treasure of Sierra Madre again. And that's where I found all my inserts and half sheets.
So this was in the 70s?
In the 70s, yeah, the early 70s. I've had people call me up back in the old days and said, I hear you like movie posters. I said, yeah. They said, well, I got a few boxes of them you can have them. And the guy would come and just leave me boxes of movie posters. You just have to understand how little value this material was to anybody else. And I'll tell you this story, too. I didn't know that anybody else even collected this stuff, except that one time in Asheboro when I showed it around, and a couple of people, you know, went after it, but then they lost interest. But I never thought that anybody gave a shit about any of this stuff. I did it all because I was passionate about it. Well, so I'm 20-something years old, like 21 or something, and having collected, you know, I don't know, all those years, you know, 10 years or more, and I'm walking down the street in Georgetown, Washington, and I pass the damn movie poster store. I do a double take on it about, you know, and I just about fainted because in that split second, I realized right then and there that there were other people that cared about this stuff as much as I did. This is before I started selling them or anything. And I went through that. I remember going in that movie poster store. I was so excited. I looked through everything in there, and they didn't have one thing that I didn't have that I wanted anyway. A bunch of crap, but you know, nobody had what I had in those days. You know, Wade Williams did. A couple of those guys, you know, that were ahead of me. Wade Williams, I don't know if you know that. It's this way. When I was getting posters out of the trash, Wade was also getting posters out of the trash, but he was also getting the films and buying the theaters, and then he went back and worked back and got the rights to the films.
Yeah, I know he did that for Plan 9 from Outer Space. I know he did that one.
Yeah, he actually found that stuff. So Wade's an old buddy. He and I have known each other for many, many years. And we're just talking old school here. And I know there's a bunch of old schoolers out there. But
you've always struck me, though, I mean, given your knowledge of posters, it always seems to me like you were far more of a collector than a dealer, correct?
Well, I was only a dealer to pay the bills. I mean, if I hadn't had to pay bills, I never would have sold all those posters. I probably would have traded them, kept them. There was one time I had so many posters I didn't need the money. I almost thought about running a contest in Movie Collectors World, which was a newspaper. I was going to say, look, I got an extra insert from Forbidden Planet here. Whoever writes me the best essay on whatever, movie posters or this movie or whatever, I'll give them the movie poster. But eventually I had to start selling stuff to live. I mean, the amazing thing is that I have lived my entire adult life off of what I took out of the trash when I was a little kid. It has funded my life, remodeled my house. You know, I think of it as Buffalo and the Indians. I mean, you got the hide, you got the soup, you got the bones, you got, you know, everything. Movie posters were my totem, and I've written for them. I did one of the first art displays for them, and I found millions of dollars of worth of stuff when I worked for Fox. I've found stuff that had been hid away.
In the 1970s, were there any other major discoveries aside from the one on Film Row here in Charlotte in the poster warehouse? Yeah. Okay.
Robbie,
let me ask you this. Did you ever stumble across, you mentioned getting in a car and driving around. Did you ever stumble on an abandoned theater or a projection booth and just kind of walk in and make the discovery of a lifetime?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You want to hear the story?
Sure.
All right. Robbie was asking around about movie posters, you know, and his father had this connection to theater managers and stuff. So Robbie gives me a call and says, there's this guy that's got some posters in this old theater they're going to tear down, and let's go get them. And I said, cool. So I guess Robbie and I rode over there. I remember I was with him. So it's this crummy little theater in some small town outside of Charlotte. I don't know, it was probably an hour away. Just some little town, some crummy little theater had been there forever. And so there's a guy, he doesn't even look up, this guy sitting in working on the books or whatever in the projection booth, little projection booth. And he said, we heard you had some, Robbie probably said, my father said you had some movie posters we could have. And he said, yeah, go on upstairs, take what you want. That was all he said to us. So Robbie and I go up these real narrow steps, and we go up to the second floor, you know, where often those days the projectionists would sleep on a cot, live up there. And, you know, the big simplex projectors were there and all that. And there were one sheets folded and stacked across the entire top of this second floor of this building up to your knees. That's where I found the one sheets.
Like,
I mean, there was
Day of the Earth Stood Still, the Hitchcock stuff was in
stack.
There. Earlier posters and that. I mean,
the stack, and I opened it up. Creature from the Black Lagoon, you know, Dracula, 1947.
Was that where you found your Dracula? I know you had a Dracula 47. Was that where you found yours?
I found it in the trash. Yeah, got it for free. Imagine somebody telling you take what you want, and still the stuff wasn't worth anything. It was just we loved the movie so much later that the money started flowing on these things. And the fact that people collect. I think my book helped start the hobby really, because I remember talking to Walter Rubin, and he said he got my book, and that was the first thing, you know, first time he realized that you could get this stuff. A very sharp character, but so, I remember he said he got my book, and it was put this way: somewhat instrumental in him getting started in it. But
Oh, sure. This guy's house you went over to, was it his house? Was it a movie theater? And did he mention to you how he got all this stuff?
oh, it was a movie theater. They just kept it. They didn't throw it away.
Mm-hmm. And
you show a movie, you hang the poster up, you put the poster in a stack on the second floor.
And so your 47 Dracula that you had, was that where you found yours in that collection?
Yeah, it was in a stack of shit on the floor.
Jeez.
And let me tell you something.
Holy cow.
Let me tell you something. You want a thrill. I could still feel how excited I was. I mean, it was Treasure Sierra Madre, it's Thanks Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
I am very thankful to the gods of posters for what they've given me, what they've allowed me to find. And,
So all those posters, in terms of where we're at now, do you still have a lot of those posters left? Did you split the collection with,
I split with Robbie, but I took all the monster and science fiction. He took all the westerns. Although he did get a bunch of really good posters.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about knit 3 sheets too,
Wow.
It was like the heavens just opened up. There, what can I say?
And then you mentioned
I was the luckiest kid on the planet at that particular moment.
And then you mentioned, though, there was a guy in Charlotte. I don't know if this was the same gentleman you were speaking about earlier, but there was a magician that had assembled quite a collection.
Now there's two. I think you're talking about a guy that was involved with, might have been named Leonard something. I thought you knew him. He was involved with the road showing exploitation films, like the four walling. The early adult type stuff, that had posters that were silk screen, not printed offset.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of silk screen printed posters, and Pat Patterson's posters were silk screen as well, using Dayglow inks. I sold some of the window cards that he did, but they were really, truly art. I wish I still had those, but I just can't keep everything, and I don't intend to keep everything.
How long did you live in Charlotte before you decided it was time to move out to California? All
right. I had a job. I was the only professional comedian in North Carolina at the time that I left. This was in the late 70s. I had a live weekly show on Channel 3, which was, back in those days, people out in the country just bought TVs and turned it to Channel 3, and they didn't turn it to anything else.
Oh, it's still big stuff. WBTV is huge still here.
Well, I had a show called Those Were the Years, mm-hmm. and we did live comedy on it, and I was doing that for 2 years. I was also the head writer at an advertising agency, and I also was the on-air movie reviewer for CBS. For Channel 3. So I got these 3 advanced reels from Star Wars. In those days they came 16 millimeter, 3-minute 16 millimeter rolls film. And I put those things in the projector and looked at them, and I was electrified. It was like another message from the cosmos. And when I looked at that Star Wars stuff, it connected the pre-war, pre-atom bomb movie to the post-war, post-atom bomb movie, science fiction. It was a synthesis of everything that had come through science fiction up to that point, and it was, it electrified everybody. In those days, people would stand in line for days, to go see the daggone thing over and over again. It was crazy, but for me, it was a call to action. It was like, I wanted to make science fiction movies. I'd been making movies in the South and working a lot of them, wrote Earl Owensby's first movie. And so I was growing in that local filmmaking pool. But when Star Wars came out, I said, I got to go to California, so I quit all three of my jobs. I quit my own television show. And, of course, I was only making $75 a week, but, you know, I had a live TV show. And so I quit all that and put a box of books and typewriter in my car, and I drove to California and moved to a place right above Hollywood and Vine, and I started studying how to write screenplays better.
So this was in the late 1970s?
That was 1978.
Okay.
Once again, you know, well, 77 is when Star Wars came out. It took me a little while to get my butt out to California, but I left home, sure enough, because of Star Wars. I just didn't want to be 70 years old like I am now and not have made the journey, not have gone to see where I was being called. So, you know, it was just part of that same string I've been telling you about that I've been pulling on. So I went to California to learn how to, working as a film editor and as a assistant cameraman for the couple of years I did before I got the TV show. And then I knew that intuitively that there had to be a linear structure to screenplays, but there were no books about it. Nobody knew anything about it. You know, it was, you know, even now it's conjecture, but, you know, then there was nothing, no information. So I wanted to go to California and learn the structure of how to write a screenplay better. And so my friend, and ex-sister-in-law, Nancy, emailed me this brochure from this place called the Sherwood Oaks Experimental College. And sure enough, there was this guy named Sid Field, S-Y-D, Field, he's passed away now, was teaching like the first screenplay structure course. And I completely flipped out over that. So that's what led me to California. I came to California to write screenplays. So I lived off of movie posters, had more money from selling posters, and I took 7 classes a week, 4 dance classes, 1 comedy class, and 2 writing classes. I also followed my comedy career out here and studied with the Groundlings for a couple of years and managed a theater on Friday nights and became a member of the Groundlings, which is, at the time, was LA's premier improv group.
So was it hard, though, for you to leave posters and stuff behind? I mean, obviously you took your collection with you, but...
I didn't take much with me. I took a King Kong lobby card that I hung on the wall. I'm telling you, and it goes back to your very first question about the ephemeral nature of things. With all my life I put in all this stuff, it's just stuff. It's just paper. You know, you can miss seeing a poster or whatever, but I see them all in my head anyway. I've internalized them after all this time. So, and I had the excitement of finding them and, you know, all that stuff. You know, I have a couple of movie posters hanging up now, but I'll tell you what they are. They're from movies that don't exist. Because I took like a pile of all the posters that were torn or torn in half or pieces, I saved and had them in one box. So I would cut up like 10 posters and make one poster out of them, like, you know, 18 Ants, just Sinners from Hell is one of the posters I made. So I'll show you pictures of them sometime if you want to see.
When you moved from North Carolina to California,
take nothing with you. You take books.
So what happened to all those posters?
They were in storage.
Oh, you left them in
storage?
storage?
In storage all this time.
Okay. And so was there a point, I guess, you know, when you went out there, did you...
know that fire that I told you about, right? Okay. All the posters packed up were in a U-Haul that I brought out from North Carolina to have them out here, store them out here, use them and sell them out here. That U-Haul was sitting in the yard when we had to evacuate from that fire. So it's not you know, it is the posters, but it's not the posters.
Yeah. So what I just want to clarify though is, so what year was the fire?
early 90s, 92, 93.
Okay, so the posters made it from the Charlotte, North Carolina out to California.
In 93.
In 93. And
they went into a high-grade storage unit right after that fire. They went from my house to the storage unit without ever being unpacked to go into my house.
Yeah, so that's nice. So the fire didn't hit them or anything. That was pretty fortunate, right?
They were there, but the fire didn't get them. Amazing.
When you moved from Charlotte to California, what were some of your major sources of posters out there?
Oh, geez. There was some great poster stores out here. One place, I think it was called Hollywood Book and Poster in Las Palmas. I used to drive into Hollywood. It was a great restaurant there, like fast food restaurant for Greek food. I'd never had it before. And then I'd walk around the corner of this place, and there was a guy named Eric Caden, long-haired hippie guy. His father, Stan Caden, collected posters before Wade Williams did. He was like, one of the original fanboys probably. So Eric liked monsters and this and that. And there were guys like Ron Boris and Eric Caden that I was selling those $10 or $20 mint Psycho inserts to. So these guys knew me out here from selling posters back in North Carolina. So I knew these guys, and it's like, we're talking 40 years ago or something, And so anyway, Hollywood Book and Poster was a great place.
Mm-hmm. Were there any places out there you could just walk into and just see like Universal Horror posters?
Didn't really have great stuff out. I mean, you could get like there were a lot of poster stores in those days. I mean, the few posters that I bought at that particular time were when you could buy a 3-sheet I was a teenage werewolf for like $25. So I would kind of say, what 3 sheets have you got? And I'd buy 3 sheets. Nobody else gave a damn about them. So as people started collecting 1 sheets and lobby cards, I went more into stills and more into 3 sheets. And I kind of, and in toy collecting, I did it too. And in card collecting and comic collecting, I always moved towards the periphery as interest grows in a particular area. That's has always allowed me to have what I want, either free or at nearly no cost.
Mm. Well, you think of California and Hollywood and Los Angeles. You mentioned Ron Borst, who we've had on the show, buying some of your movie paper once you moved out there from you. You think of it as one of the movie capitals of the world, and there had to have already been people out there who are passionate about movie memorabilia. Whereas back home in we're back in North Carolina, there's nobody to this day that really collects movie memorabilia here in the Charlotte or North Carolina area.
To this day, I collect a lot of stuff that people don't even know about. I've made trips to Germany to buy margarine premiums, and nobody's ever even heard of them. It's like I continue to travel to the periphery of collections and of things.
So a lot of people don't know this, though, about you, and we've mentioned this, we've hit on it earlier, and I'm sure there's going to be a few stories about this, but you were head curator at 20th Century Fox Studio, and you founded their archives, right? And what year was this? Was this in 91?
Okay, that is a bit of a longer story. Let me give you a little bit of lead on and into that. So I was called in as a toy consultant on the movie Toys.
With Robin Williams, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Barry Levinson film. And the production designer was a guy named Nando Scarpiati, who was a production designer for The Conformists, for God's sakes. and Bertolucci's film, and also The Last Emperor. He won an Academy Award for that. So there's this Italian gentleman that, I'm telling you, to following visuals all your life, for me to walk into a room with this guy was just like an honor. So I thought about it, and I said, so I walk in there and I go in this meeting, and I thought it was going to be like 3 weeks of work. And I saw the production design, the art that they had for this thing, and I said, I'll do anything. I got to work on this show. And so they hired me, and that 3 weeks turned into about a year. And I also ended up working for Albert Wolski, the wardrobe designer, who had won the Academy Award for Bugsy, I think, and some other stuff. So I worked for 2 departments. Both of them were nominated for Academy Awards. And, but the head of production was a bit of a collector. And, so I said to him, there's a canoe out here from, Last of the Mohicans sitting in the rain. That thing is worth thousands of dollars. So what happened was, they said, okay, we're going to give you an office, just like you see in the movies. We're going to give you an office. We want you to go around and tell us everything that's here that we don't see that's valuable. I said, okay. So, it's like in those days, you go to the men's room in the bathroom, there's like 6 stalls lined up in the art department building. And right outside these 6 stalls is a wall of filing cabinets. 10 filing cabinets, 4 drawers filled with set stills and drawings for sets all the way back to the silent era.
Wow.
With no locks on anything. So I started putting locks on everything. And also the things they threw away. Oh my God. The artwork. They tried to get rid of the research department. I saved that. So I knocked a hole in the wall of the research department and started a still archive. Nobody cared for any of that stuff. So what prompted them to finally decide to start archiving props and memorabilia, and why so late into the 90s? It was nobody's job to look after that stuff.
But it had to be of value.
Not to anyone. Not really, no.
You think of Planet Hollywood restaurants, and you think of...
I had to show them how that it was worth something. You remember when all the Titanic stuff sold?
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. We're going to get to that in a second. Yeah,
that's how I ended up working for the chairman of 20th Century Fox.
So before you got there, what kind of record keeping and inventory system do they have in place? Any kind?
No, not really.
Okay.
You could walk into a room like I did and see boxes of stills stacked to the ceiling. You could put your hand in a box and open it up, and what I found when I opened it up was the original set stills to Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Priceless. Nobody put locks. I was the one that put locks on all the drawers. But, there were some very, very smart people. Let me tell you, some of the smartest people that I've ever been around running that place. My boss, when I first started working there, John Landau, is the guy that won the Academy Award for producing Titanic, and he's now been, the producing partner for the director of Titanic, Cameron, ever since then.
Yes.
Tom Sherrick, I gotta tell you about this guy. Tom Sherrick was the chairman of the board of 20th Century Fox. And he got it, It was those guys that got it, saying, okay, keep going. But let me tell you how I made it worth money to them, I can tell you a lot of ways like that, but I'll tell you one because I've been following the finder kind of through line, here's the kind of finding I did at the corporate level once I took my act to the corporate level at the studio. I would get a call from the chief executive officer chief financial officer of Fox and say, no, we got this storage room outside Heathrow. We've been spending $750 a month for the past 12 years, and we don't know what's in it. Would you find out for us? I said, I will. I got off the telephone. I called my buddy Evan Todd at Planet Hollywood, and this was just when Planet Hollywood was going up the ranks. And I said, look, I got to go over there and get in this thing. And I tell you what, everything too big for me to hold on to here, I'll let you guys use and put on display. You pay for everything. So I had the bill footed. I went there. So I walk into this storage room, and it was from the Alien movies. I found, original models from the Alien stuff and artwork and all this stuff, plus the molds for the Alien Queen, everything except the bottom jaw mold for the Alien Queen from Aliens.
I bet it scared the shit out of you when you walked in there, right? Seeing all those...
no, it was just a pile of molds. You can't tell what something is and it's a mold because it's just pieces. I found a licensee to actually sculpt the missing piece and make these things available. We were selling Alien Queens for God knows how much money. And in my museum, there was an Alien Queen fighting the power loader, original power loader that we borrowed from Cameron in the museum that I built for Fox in Australia. So
you mentioned that you saved around $5 million or $6 million worth of memorabilia from Fox's archives from being destroyed.
That's right. That's just what was in the museum. That was the appraised value of that was the insurance for the stuff in the museum, and everything in the museum came out of the trash.
It's just so hard to believe that it took this long for executives to realize not only the importance and the value of these one-of-a-kind rare pieces. I mean, you think how iconic the 20th Century Fox brand is in terms of films like Day the Earth Stood Still. You mentioned earlier the Monroe dramas and musicals, Planet of the Apes, the Star Wars films, and George Lucas.
A handful of people that got it and saw how they could, continue to work with it, make money with it, use it, bring it alive.
The irony of this is with Disney's acquisition of Fox last year, Disney was actually one of the first ones of its kind to preserve props and memorabilia. I know Walt Disney was big on that. I wonder,
absolutely.
I wonder if budgeting will go up now for...
Dave Smith was the head of the Disney thing, and I went to see him when I was forming the archives at Fox. Also, the other people that had one of the first archives was Lucasfilm, so I went up to Lucasfilm too. And saw how they organized stuff. And then I went to study how archives were done in Europe. I traveled around the world studying, like, from the Stiftung Deutsche Kinemathek in Berlin. Those guys know how to save something. You say, okay, I'd like to look at the original drawings for Metropolis. They take you into a room, and it's like there's 4 boxes before you get to the thing that's in there, but it's in there and it's perfectly preserved and it's, it's beautiful. I've been there and I've seen it.
So you mentioned earlier about the 1997 Titanic auction, and that picture cost approximately...
It wasn't an auction. It was... It was sold in the Peterman catalog.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, sir, I do.
You know that story?
And so I did read on the Los Angeles Times backlog, they had an article on it, and like I said, the picture cost $200 million to make, but it did over $2 billion at the box office. But the Los Angeles Times article, though, went on to say that, the props were being sold to help retire the considerable debt from the budget of the film.
I'm sitting in a meeting. Tom Sherrick is chairman of the board, but he was also the head of marketing. So once a week there was a marketing meeting, and I didn't really get to talk any or do much anything. I just sat in and listened to what kind of thing. So, but at the end of this meeting, Sherrick walks over to me and he whispers in my ear and he says, "We're doing this picture of Titanic. We're in it up to our eyeballs. It's costing us everything. Make some money off of the stuff. It's left over." I said, "That's great." So I went to Landau and we told him, and Landau, who was a producer, he was so smart. John's one of the most brilliant people probably ever been in the movie business. I'd say the same thing for Sherrick. So John saved a bunch of stuff. For instance, when they destroyed all the dishes, he saved a couple hundred dishes. It's like, okay, let's destroy them all, but let's save these, So he was really up with it too. So we licensed again merchandising, hooked up with the J. Peterman Company, which is out of business now. But this was like, and somehow it got arranged that this was going to be the first time, that a giant movie, sold all their stuff, and it was true. There had never been anything quite like this. So I did up certificates of authenticity. I signed them and everything, and like the plate I was telling you was I think they sold they sold the plate for $100, not $1,000. Maybe there was 1,000 plates. But that was $100,000 of revenue right there. And, with just sweeping up stuff out of trash. But we sold the wardrobe and, pieces of this and all this stuff. So all of this gets put in the Peterman catalog. It also promotes the film. But they made a fortune on that stuff. The entire catalog sold out in 7 days. And the second catalog sold out before it was even finished being printed. That's how hot this stuff was. And it just was like a gold rush. So they went into it because they were afraid they were going to lose their shirt in this really expensive movie. Nobody knows how a movie's really going to do. And it was the most expensive movie I'd ever seen anybody make. And they got us started saving the stuff, organized. We set up the sale of it, and it made a fortune with that, and with articles on NPR and everything. I mean, it was a big thing, and it kind of started a wave of collecting prop stuff. Planet Hollywood, by displaying all that stuff, let people know that things that they might have thought they never could have seen or owned were available. This took it to the people, and that you actually could own a piece of Gone with the Wind, So it really stimulated prop and wardrobe collecting and all this stuff, but they never were able to maximize it again in another picture. And they used to send these NBA guys, and they said, well, we're trying to figure out, what movie to do next. I said, you can't figure it out that way. It's got to be a picture that just got, like X-Men was the next one that stuff was worth money from. When Independence Day came out, I was on the floor when they were sweeping up, there was a set piece, which was a section of the mothership, and it had these little miniature models of the city destroyer as a decoration on it, just kind of a motif. So, I don't know, there were about a dozen of those, and I picked them up out of the trash, put them in a box, took them back to my office. So I took made a miniature one sheet from it, put that in a frame. I got one of them sitting right here in my office, the one that I did certificate of authenticity, numbered them 1 through 10 or whatever. And I gave, all except for the one I got to keep, gave the other ones to Tom Sherrick, and they used them to give away on, as promotions. So I get this call from Tom Sherrick. He says, Alan? I said, yeah. He said, that plaque that we gave away, you gave me those things. I said, yeah. He said, we got over $1 million in publicity time on Japanese morning television with one. It was like 400,000 in Italy or something like that. But we turned a piece of stuff that was trash into something worth over $1 million.
I guess my big question for you, though, is with the Titanic stuff. I mean, the film brought back, it did 10 times what the budget was. So,
well, the movie turned out to be a success. Nobody knew it was going to be that big a success.
Okay, so they had you selling stuff before the movie even, was released?
As the movie came out, well, they fed each other. The value of the stuff went up because the movie took off, and the fact that people were buying the stuff just supported the movie. So, let's put it this way. When it works all the way across the boards. Mm-hmm. When it doesn't work, if the movie's gone in the trash, I knew I'd still be able to make money for the company selling the materials. It didn't matter to me whether the movie made $10 or $1 trillion. A Titanic plate was going to be worth something because it's just cool. It's just the power of that object,
So,
and the fact that it was a movie prop and this and that. But that was lightning in a bottle. I don't know that anyone has ever captured it quite like that. Really, we're on a wave on that one.
So, changing gears, you did mention earlier a little bit about your book. Let's talk about that. Science fiction horror movie posters in full color, which came out in 1977. And as you mentioned, it was one of the earliest and first books of its kind. I think it was the first book published in the United States on movie posters.
And
publishing them
certainly the first science fiction horror genre book.
And publishing them as and celebrating them as an art form. I believe where you said in the beginning of the book that it proved to be considerably difficult, taking 4 years to round up all the studios and getting permission to publish a book.
Let me explain about what happened with that book. There weren't any books even discussing the films. All my footnotes really were famous sponsors of film, Land and Creatures, and it was like no information on these movies out of the time. But at any rate, that doesn't affect the fact that in the old days, someone would say, "Well, do you have the rights to print that or not?" And now I'd say you probably couldn't print without permission. But in the early days of printing trash as art, they said, well, it's just trash, so you don't really need it. But the publisher that I worked, Hayward Circa in New York, was old school, and they wanted the rights to everything. And you know what? It's worth it to do something the right way. So I'm this kid in North Carolina, writing letters to these big companies, asking them if I can use movie posters from their films in this book. It's ridiculous. And but some people said yes, some people said no. Disney said no. I got down to the end where I had almost enough to do it, and Warner Brothers was on the line, and I couldn't really do the book unless Warner Brothers agreed. If I didn't have them, and I was not having enough for the book. It was pretty thin as it was, and so I called Warner Brothers. This is like the only people I called, and I got some guy on the telephone that was the head of advertising publicity. Some tough character, and I'm telling him this story, and I'm this kid with the Southern accent he probably couldn't even understand. And he said, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to do? $25 a piece? That's not even worth my time. And the guy, I could hear the phone going towards the receiver for the click, right? All right. So once again, I played the Jewish card. So I shouted, I said, hey, are you Jewish? And there was quiet for a moment. And the phone goes like this. I said, yeah, what about it? And I said, I am too, and I need a break back here. I was a Jewish kid in North Carolina trying to do this book, and the guy gave me the posters from Warner Brothers.
Wow.
So I got to do my book.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing with Warner Brothers. I know people that won't go to, you know, they're afraid to show their own prints, their own 35 millimeter prints at film festivals, because they're afraid some agent from Warner Brothers is going to come by and seize, you know, the film, even though it's, a lot of people consider it to be private property. They're notorious for making it difficult for people to own collectibles.
Look, every movie poster you got your hands on says that it belongs to the National Screen Service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's
I
this.
took the head of National Screen Service to lunch when I was working at Fox, and I talked to him about that stuff. I said, "It says it's got your name on it." He said, "What are we going to do?" You know.
Yeah, it is weird.
So
there's
the most anybody would get was cease and desist letter back in those days.
Yeah, you know, it is weird. There's this whole debate over who owns the right to images of your posters. So, for example, if I wanted to publish a book right now, like you did, but use my own images of posters that I paid for, do I have to ask for permission?
I would if I was you these days, so you'd get your ass sued.
Mm-hmm. Well,
days,
it makes sense to be safe rather than sorry, right?
This was 1977. I was on the cusp of it. You know, it's much tougher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anything you see that didn't have copyrights or everything, they just took a chance. And there's a lot of stuff that was done, and I applaud them doing it. But you know what? I did it the right way. My book and how all of this is connected. And once again, I got to say that the same thread connected through everything that ties everything together. So I give Eric Caden out in Hollywood Book and Poster a copy of my book when I'm out there, right? That's my calling card. He gives it to Charlie Band, and that's how I got working in low budget movies with Charlie Band, because I had a script. Charlie read it, and not only that book that I gave to somebody got sold into a documentary of low-budget science fiction films that I did called Monsters, Mad Men, and Machines with Gil Gerard as the host. That's how I ran into Wade Williams. I used a clip from Plan 9, and we got sued. And that's how I found out he knew it all, so that's how he and I became buddies. But that was one of the first HBO specials, was the documentary version of, like, selling that book. You know, so it's like the posters to the book, to the movie, to the television, to, you know, it's like this one thread. Pull the one thread through everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I feel like I'm so lucky, and why I never kind of question my instincts or my passions, because they just kind of, you know, if you're in the right place at the right time, you're where you're supposed to be, you know. So you follow that. So
let's talk about the Museum of Mom and Pop Culture. You know, I remember 10, 15 years ago, you putting some of your bigger titles from your collection up for sale. And maybe it was even shorter than that. Maybe it was less than 10 years ago. But there would be these new listings you would put up on eBay, in your eBay store on Saturdays. And I remember you had a reissue, unrestored Frankenstein one-sheet, House of Dracula, your Creature from the Black Lagoon, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and you had all these posters from real art re-releases and these major science fiction pieces. Looking back, I wish personally I would have bought more from you, but all this stuff was pulled by you out of the trash, correct?
All came out of the trash. If it was folded, it came out of that. It came out of that place where the guy said, "I'll go up, take what you want." Hmm. I mean, I called my father, and I think Robbie got what he wanted, went home. But I called my father, and he left work, hooked up the biggest U-Haul trailer you could get in those days to his Cadillac, hired two guys on the street, and they completely cleaned that place out. And I brought all those posters that were in that theater back to the storage. That's how my father supported my kind of crazy habit.
And I remember you were actually, a couple of years ago, you were looking for an Invasion of the Saucermen 3-sheet, the bottom half, and the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Did you ever find those?
No, I sold the pieces.
Sold the pieces. Yeah.
But, Invasion of the Saucer Man is an interesting title because that started another way of thinking for me, is that I was in my warehouse and I pulled out the one sheet and I said, geez, I think I could make one of these and fool myself. I got a little scared, that they could be copied, the machine folding, all of it, but the graphic. And so I was working at Fox at the time, so I had the full support of the studio. So I took 3 posters, Day the Earth Stood Still, Laura, and a Tom Mix one sheet, all 3 lithos, and given as much money as I wanted to spend, make copies of them to see if I could fool the eye. And this was when G-Clays were coming out and this and that. And I didn't even make them full size. I wasn't going to do that. What I ended up doing was making them 11 by 14, and I signed and numbered them, 1 through 7 once again, and then gave the set of 3. I kept one set of the 3 for myself, and gave the rest to the studio executives for Christmas. But the test we ran showed that it said that it could be done. And oddly enough, it was that title, Invasion of the Saucer Men, that said I'm gonna have to start selling these now, because there will be a time in the not too distant future where the average collector is not going to be able to tell whether this was an original or not. And I was specifically concerned about Chinese copies or whatever, so I'm not quite as concerned about it as I used to be. But you mentioned that title, and that just started me that line of thinking.
So many stories, so fascinating. Unlike a lot of other people out there, I always got the impression that for you, collecting movie memorabilia and it being valuable was just kind of an added plus and secondary. And that is to say that, you'd been scoping this, you'd been still out there scoping this stuff out, like a kid in a candy store, even if it wasn't worth anything. And I think that mentality is what actually makes great demand and value for memorabilia to begin with.
It reflects the true spirit of collecting something, just the fun of it. If it excites you, you want it, I knew somewhere along the line, and I used to say this, I haven't said it in a long time, when I was storing all of them, I said, I'll either, sell them someday for good money, or I'll put them up as wallpaper and keep my house warm. In the old days during the Depression, people used newspaper for insulation. It's like, and that could still happen. Let me tell you, we live in a world that, listen, I'm an apocalyptic science fiction screenwriter. What can I say? But we live in a world now that the world could end while you and I are sitting here talking on the telephone. I mean, and none of anything's going to be worth anything. So you just got to kind of enjoy what you do and enjoy what you collect, and don't buy shit because you think you're going to make money off of it. You only buy something if you really want it, if you love it. And then maybe 20 years from now you sell it for a few more dollars if you want to. I was never very good at, one of the reasons I never spent money for things is every time I bought something, it never paid off. So I was always better just finding it and sitting on it for 20 years till somebody else wanted it. And that's how I made a living a good part of my life.
Well, thanks, Alan, for your time. And I think that's going to wrap it up for today's show here on News and Movies Radio. You can check out all of our latest interviews and movie reviews by subscribing through email at newsandmoviesradio.com or by clicking the subscribe button on our News and Movies Radio Podomatic, YouTube, or Apple iTunes store pages. We are 100% listener-funded radio. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider making a donation through our Patreon page at patreon.com/News and Movies Radio. We'll be back in the coming weeks with more interviews and stories from pop culture collectors, dealers, and enthusiasts alike. Thanks so much again, Alan, for your time and being on the show today and sharing with your knowledge about us about movie posters.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been an honor.